traditionally, in most societies, you get a basic division, a class division between the haves and the have-nots. The haves who are able to live a life of leisure because they are self-sufficient, they have the resources to have a life of leisure. They don't have to work. They make others work for them. So you have those who are people of leisure, in classical terms the aristocracy, the leisured class, and then you have the workers. Okay? Two classes of people. That's been turned on its head because some of the people who've got to work hardest now are the people at the top of the pile. If you are a CEO of a firm, instead of getting other people to work for you, you've got to work twice as hard as any of your underlings. A fundamental change in society, by the way. However, just think in terms, okay, in ancient societies, going right until modern times, you have the leisured class, the aristocracy, and then you have the workers. And whether they're workers who work for the aristocracy or work for themselves, they're still the workers. So you have a class difference between rest and work. Now, to understand the Old Testament and its teaching on the Sabbath, you need to see that it was God instituted it not only against the human tendency to use work by human beings to justify themselves, to turn themselves into God, and to create a world for themselves without God. So that's just the old idolatry. But the teaching on the Sabbath is against another teaching, and it is the pagan teaching which you find articulated most clearly in Babylonian religion. I don't know if any of you have read the very famous foundational Babylonian text called the Enuma Elish, which is about the origin of things. Very interesting reading. It's Babylonian Genesis, if you like, the same status. Interestingly, the flood features very prominently there too. The Enuma Elish tells the following story. Originally, there were no human beings on earth. You had the earth, the universe, and there were only gods who inhabited the earth. And the gods were divided into two classes. This is the Babylonian story. You had the superior gods, the supreme gods, the sky gods. They were the leisured class. And then you had the earth gods, and some stories, but here it's not in the Enuma Elish, there's also the gods of the underworld. You had the earth gods who were the workers. So you had two classes of gods. There were the leisurely gods, the aristocracy, the sky gods, the supreme gods, and then you had the lower class of gods who had to do all the work on earth. And their basic task was to look after the supreme gods, and the supreme god was the great god Marduk. You know, he was the head of the pile. Well, the junior gods got sick of this arrangement, so they called the first strike in human history. They just dropped their tools and refused to look after the temples of the big gods, refused to provide them with clothing, entertainment, resources to govern, and above all, food. The situation was desperate. There was counsel, there was some discussion, maybe they should wipe out these junior gods, but eventually the wise heads prevailed amongst the gods, and there was a compromise. And the compromise was this, that they created human beings to be the slaves of the gods. They created human beings to be the slaves of the gods here on earth. So human beings were created to look after the gods. to build their temples, to provide food for them, that's offerings, to entertain them with music and song and so on, to dress them appropriately according to their status, to provide wealth for them, and to provide munitions, armaments for them. Human beings, slaves of the gods. That was their task. And in this arrangement then, if you like, at core, Babylonian religion, in Babylonian religion, ritual was the work that human beings did for their gods. So human beings were the slaves for their gods. They worked for their gods. They didn't work with them, but they did all the work. Of course, there were perks. The gods looked after them out of their own interest and made sure that they had enough food, that they were protected, etc. Now, right at the beginning of Genesis, we have this whole picture turned on its head. Because in Genesis, we see, yes, God created the world. Yes, God created human beings. But right from the beginning, God is not a bludger. In Australian terms, God is not a person who doesn't do any work, but he is a worker. And he works 7 days to create the world. And so he is a worker. And he does work. He's not lazy. And but he doesn't just do work. He then rests on the 7th day to enjoy the fruits of his labour and to provide rest for human beings. So here you have God establishing a pattern of work and rest. God working and creating human beings to work not for him but together with him, and creating rest so that human beings could rest together with him and to enjoy the fruits of their labour. But at the heart of it lies God's provision of rest, of leisure for all his people on the 7th day. And it wasn't just in Israel. The remarkable thing, if you were a pagan person coming to Israel, there were so many things that seemed to be familiar, but was totally different. And one of the things was that instead of just having religious festivals, 3 or 4 times a year, big religious festivals, the Jews had a sort of a mini, it wasn't really a festival in the classical pagan terms, but they had this religious day of what? Rest. And they acknowledged and served their gods by doing what? Nothing. Zilch. I mean, what kind of God is that? Who creates human beings and gives them rest, provides rest for them, and says, this is the way, it's not by working that you'll be blessed, but by resting you'll be blessed. You won't be sanctified by working for your God, but you'll be sanctified by resting with your God. And this wasn't just, say, a pagan Babylonian coming to Israel. I'm imagining now, I'm putting myself into his shoes, would say, yeah, that's crazy. Well, at least that should only be the upper class that rest. So basically the aristocracy, the king and the officials, the bigwigs in society, or at the most it should be the bigwigs and the heads of every household. Your extended family, it's the fathers and mothers, but somebody's got to do the work even on a day of rest. So it's children still have to work, and servants still have to work, and animals still have to work. However, when God instituted the Sabbath, it was a day of rest for every single person. Every single person, and all the domesticated animals too. And this included the slaves. Slaves. 1 day a week, slaves were treated as if they were aristocracy. Can I put again? 1 day a week, slaves were treated as if they were freemen, aristocracy. You can see the explanation of the third commandment in, particularly in Deuteronomy, where this is emphasized. Now, do you get the basic picture? It's utterly, totally countercultural. How do you serve God? By doing nothing. What on earth is the purpose of doing nothing? Okay? What's the purpose of doing nothing? Resting. Well, what's the purpose of resting? Well, we get a hint of it already in Genesis. God did what to the seventh day? He blessed it and made it therefore a means of blessing. Not that you produce blessing for yourself, but the means by which you receive blessing from God. So you work in order not to do something to get something, but you rest in order to receive blessing. And that's within the order of creation, but it gets better than that. You don't work in order to become holy, no, godlike, but you rest in order to receive and share God's holiness. Resting. Okay, that lies at the heart of the Old Testament and its theology of worship. And you won't understand, very often we get a distorted picture of even present-day Judaism, and we hear lots of sermons about how terrible the law is, and poor Jews are not allowed to do anything on the Sabbath, and there's all these laws, and what a burden the Sabbath is. You talk to any Jew and they say, burden? Sabbath is delight, joy, it's the best day of the week for everybody. It's a gift, not a burden. Any good Jew will tell you that. Okay? But you have a rest at the heart of Jewish worship. And that's not just every seventh day, but then you get extraordinary Sabbaths on feast days. I won't go through the whole calendar. So you get Sabbaths, which is extraordinary Sabbaths. Say, whenever the Passover occurs, and it can occur any day of the week, but the day after the day after the evening of the Passover is a day of complete rest. It doesn't matter which day of the week it is. So the regular Sabbaths, and then you have these extraordinary Sabbaths, resting as part of the worship of God. And there's two other things which any pagan person would find it extraordinary. First of all, the festivals, pagan festivals, and you still get it in Hinduism, and you still get it in some New Agey kind of spiritualities. The times for spiritual renewal are determined by the cosmic clock. So basically, you remember God establishes the sun and moon and stars for times and seasons. So how do you measure a month? It's by the cycle of the moon. How do you measure a year? The cycle of the seasons. And part of Israel's worship is synchronizing the worship with the cosmic clock, if I could put that, the cosmic movement. So the Passover is determined by the spring equinox, Feast of Tabernacles by the autumn equinox. But these are of secondary importance. The primary foundation of the liturgical clock has no connection with created order, created time. It transcends creative time. There's nothing in the cosmic order which determines that the number 7 is special in any way. 7 is not part of the cosmic clock. Paganism, the idea is that you've got to synchronize yourself, you've got to harmonize yourself with the cosmic order, created order. Now, what the Sabbath does is takes people out of created space and time. You with me? Can you understand the point I'm making? It's in time, and yet it takes you outside of time. If you like, it synchronizes you not with creation, but it synchronizes you with the Creator. And secondly, have you ever noticed that something in Genesis, you always got to, when you read the Bible, you look for the unexpected things. And there's a certain pattern that's established when you read Genesis 1, the so-called 7 days. Not of creation, but by the way, there's 7 days in which God orders the cosmos. It's the 7 days for the ordering of the cosmos. Creation is involved, but that's not the focus. It's in order. At the end of every day, what's the refrain? It was evening, there was morning, first day, second day, third day, fourth day. Oh, here we go again. Fifth day, sixth day, and then nothing. There is no evening, no morning on the end of the 7th day. The rabbis very ponder on this and put it exactly right, and I think they get it right, the intention of that narrative. There is no evening and morning on the 7th day, because the 7th day is a day in time, but it's also a window of eternity. It is eschatological. It is in time, and yet it is beyond time. It's the Sabbath is the day of eternity and points to eternal time. So much for background to this passage. So can are there any questions that or observations? If you get a chance, do read much more. There's a lot of good work being done by Old Testament scholars, many of them Jews, on the Sabbath day. It's very, very important if you're going to get your head around Old Testament, its worship, present-day Judaism, and also around the early church, because it's there in the background to a lot of what happens in the early church. The Sabbath. Now, as you know, in the early church that's broken because we don't worship on the 7th day, but we worship on the 8th day. The 8th day, which is the day of resurrection. It's also the day of the Holy Spirit. It's the day in time, but it is the day of the beginning of, it's the end, not the 7th day is the end of the old age. The 8th day is the day of the new age, the age to come. The eternal day, the eternal time. The Hebrews says this at the beginning: in many and various ways God spoke of old to our fathers by the prophets, but in the last of days, not in these last days, but in the last of days, he has spoken to us by his Son. Last of days? If you think in terms 7-day week, it's, yes, the 8th day, the last of days, which is the eternal day, the day of eternity. So you have 7 days preaching through the prophets, if you like, and the 8th day is the day of the Messiah. You get discussion of this in the letter of Barnabas, and it's very, very prominent then in patristic theology, the exegesis of this, the interpretation of this. Now, any comments, question? Okay, now in the light of this, and in the light of what I've just done, let's do 2 things. First of all, let's read Psalm 95, because this chapter is an exegesis of Psalm 95. exegesis and application of Psalm 95. Psalm 95, well, you're familiar with that because it's the first part of it is the opening psalmody verses for Matins. And in some orders it's also for Vespers, but the first part of it, in ancient Israel, it would have been a psalm sung maybe first of all on festival days, when the 3 pilgrim festivals, when people came up to Jerusalem, they came in procession into the temple. So if you imagine, this is the situation, the location of this psalm is a procession of people led by the Levitical choir, the temple choir, leading the people in procession from outside the temple up the Holy Way in Jerusalem into the temple precincts. So that's the location, that's the picture. Originally it was set to be sung on probably the festival days, and then we don't know when, but then it became used every Sabbath day, and to present day it's in the synagogue it's one of the Sabbath psalms. Could somebody read that for me, please? And notice its divisions.
Oh, come, let us sing to the Lord. Let us make a joyful noise to the rock of our salvation. Let us come into his presence with thanksgiving. Let us make a joyful noise to him with songs of praise. For the Lord is a great God and a great King above all gods. In his hand are the depths of the earth. The heights of the mountains are his also. The sea is his, for he made it, and his hands formed the dry land. O come, let us worship and bow down. Let us kneel before the Lord our Maker. For he is our God, and we are the people of his pasture and the sheep of his hand.
Just pause there. The us here, who is the us? Let us.
Congregation.
It's the congregation led by?
The priest.
Which group of priests?
Levites.
Which group of Levites? No. This is the temple choir, the Levitical choir, the choir established by David. They perform music, they lead in song. So the priests are there, but the people who are doing the singing here come, saying come by the way is walk, travel along with us, come, halach, Hebrew, lach, walk along with us, let us do this. It's the whole congregation, the priests, but it's the choir that sings and leads the congregation as it comes into procession into the temple. Okay, that's the situation. You got the basic picture now? And then something funny happens. Go on.
Today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as at Meribah, as on the day of Massah in the wilderness, when your fathers put me to the test and put me to the proof, though they had seen my work. For 40 years I loathed that generation, and said, they are a people who go astray in their heart, and they have not known my ways. Therefore I swore in my wrath, they shall not enter my rest.
Okay. Now, who starts speaking then? First of all, we have the choir speaking. And the choir is appointed by David. So David here, through his choir, is speaking. First part of the psalm. Now, you come to verse, first part today of that. It sounds still as if it's the choir. And David, today, if you hear his voice, whose voice? God's voice. Notice the nearest antecedent there. He is our God. We are the people of pasture, the sheep of his hand. Today, if you hear his voice, harden not your hearts, as at Meribah. And then what happens at verse 9? What?
The Lord starts talking.
The Lord is the one who is the speaker. So this is an oracle in which God speaks prophetically to his people. So we hear the voice of God. This is a literal translation of the Septuagint. I think probably the Hebrew text is best taken in the following way. Instead of, and this is just by the way, instead of having, today if you hear his voice, should be, oh, that today you would hear his voice. Still a choir. You come into the temple. What's the most important thing now that you've come into the presence of God? Hear. Oh, that today you would hear his voice. And then you have, I think the Hebrew is best construed in this way, then you have the voice of God. So hear his voice, and now you have his voice. And what is his voice? It's a warning all the way through, but there's an implied promise. Okay, it's warning, warning, don't harden your hearts. That sums it. The way the people hardened their hearts in the desert, and God therefore swore in his wrath that they, who's the they?
Israel
Israel, when and where?
in the desert.
In the desert. God swore in his wrath that they should not enter my rest. And what's the immediate reference there to rest? The promised land. Right? Remember that none of that generation, except Joshua and Caleb and the children under the age of 40, entered the rest. So God warns the people who come into the temple are warned not to repeat the lesson of what happened in the desert. You remember the story? God promised the land. They send out spies, good land, and then what was their reaction when they heard that it was well fortified and occupied by giants, a military fortress? Let's go back to Egypt. Let's go back to the place of death. They stopped doing what? Listening. And it's not just that they stopped listening, but because they stopped listening, they hardened their hearts. They no longer listen to God, and therefore they don't receive the gifts of God. Now, on the one hand, this is a warning, but on the other hand, in the warning, there is an implied promise. Can you see the promise?
You're destined to go into the land.
Righto?
You are destined to go.
Not you. But you're nearly right. You are destined to go in the land if what?
You listen.
If you listen. Righto? They missed out because they didn't listen. However, the promise of God about the land still stands. The rest still remains open. Who will enter the land? Who will enter the place of rest, rather? Those who listen. Those who hear. And listen to the voice of God speaking to them where and when? In the divine service. And then by listening to him in the divine service, they enter both God's time of rest, Sabbath day, and the place of rest, temple. Okay, now that's the psalm. Now let's read chapter 4 and see how brilliant the exegesis and application of that text is in this chapter. But before I go there, any questions on that psalm? Notice too that the people come into God's presence not just to hear the voice of God, but to praise God. Oh, come, let us do what? Sing to the Lord, joyful noise, thanksgiving, songs of praise. That's three things. So you come to do thanks and praise, and then secondly, you come to pay homage to God, worship God, prostrate yourself before God. And thirdly, you come into God's presence to listen to the voice of God. Okay, those three things. Yes?
Yeah. Your comment on the end of verse 7, on that day you would hearken to his voice. So the idea that you were trying to get across there is it's not saying that when you hear him, don't do this, but if you would hear him now, this is what he would say.
That's right.
That's what you were
Yes.
This is
Yeah.
what he would say.
This is, no, not what he would say. This is actually what he is saying right now, prophetically, through David and through his choir, whose office is a prophetic office. This is what he is saying to you prophetically, liturgically, here and now. This is after the time of David. Let's say this might be sung 800 BC. This is what God is saying to you people who are coming to the temple to meet with God here. Everything depends on hearing. Receiving God's blessings depends on you hearing. Remember that the basic confession of faith of Israel is hear and love. Hear, O Israel, and love. But the first one, you can't love unless you hear. The imperative to hear and listen to his voice. Yes?
I think there was also, isn't there a sense of, he gives the warning because they already are. It's like remain in what you are in.
Yes.
They say, for he is our God.
Yes. Yes, notice that if there, it's not I won't go into the technicalities, if in some future time you would, today, if you hear his voice, has the idea of not so if today, if you in some time, future time listen to his voice, but the idea is today, since you hear his voice, the condition is since it's possible for you to hear his voice, since you are hearing his voice, it is a real condition, it's not a impossible condition, it's not a future condition, it's a real present condition. Grammatically, if you're interested in conditions, and there are various ones, look up some modern grammars, particularly of the New Testament. Wallace's magnificent grammar on Hebrew grammar beyond the basics has a splendid section on conditions. And he, because this is in the New Testament here, part of the Greek, this is one of the texts that he examines and said, what type of a condition is it? You have hypothetical conditions. I won't go to all the possibilities, but then you have real conditions. Now, what's a real condition? It means it has to do not with the future, but the present. If in the sense of, since this is so, then this is so now. So it's a real condition. It's not a hypothetical condition. Real condition. Anything else?
So he's not, but that's included in the fact that the psalmist seems to be saying, oh, that you would hear his voice. It's almost a cry for them to listen. But that's included in what you just said.
Yes. You are hearing.
You are hearing, and oh, that you would.
Yes. Well, remain is a bit too static. Continue to. You could say, oh, that today you would continue to listen to his voice. Keep on listening to his voice. If today you hear his voice and keep on hearing his voice, then what's the danger? You hear his voice, but you don't like what he's saying, so you switch off. You harden your heart. You switch off to God. You can see that happening all the time. It's the basic problem that you face as a pastor. You know, you preach the Word of God, but what's the problem?
Nobody's listening.
Well, it's even a deeper problem. You stop listening. You stop listening to God and you stop listening to your people. Happens all too easy. And if you stop listening to God and listening to his people, then you will have nothing to say. And it's not only that you'll have nothing to say, but your heart will be hardened. If you stop listening, you then won't be able to listen and hear. You'll become deaf. You see that happening psychologically on an earthly scale with a conflicted couple. They stop listening, and then it ends up they're no longer able to hear each other. Or kids that stop listening to their parents No matter what their parents say, they won't be able to hear what they're saying. That's on an earthly level, but that's the danger that we have in the church. And what we as pastors will be, notice that people aren't listening to us, but maybe they aren't listening to us. Why?
We're not listening.
Because we're not listening. And they'll notice, first of all, that we're not listening to them, but that's also a sign that we're not listening to God. There's a proverb, the seeing eye, hearing ear, the Lord has made them twinned, both. God's given us two eyes to be bifocal, to see things from two points of view. More importantly, God's given us two ears to be bi-aural, not bifocal, bi-aural, to listen to, maybe you can say listen to both sides, but to listen to God and to listen to people. If you stop listening, you're a fool. If you keep on listening with both ears, seeing with both eyes, then you will gain wisdom. Not about knowledge, it has to do with wisdom. Being bi-aural, bifocal. I've been talking a lot about that bifocus, that two focus, seeing things from two points of view, the heavenly vision here on earth. Okay, now let's read what Hebrews does with this. Now, a lot of what we've spoken about, what should make sense now. Could somebody read 4:1 through to verse 13? 4:1 to 13. And as you hear this, as you read it, as you follow this, notice the thread of the argument and look for what's unexpected here, an unexpected twist in the sermon. Could you read, please? Do you have it there, or does some? There, okay.
Therefore, while the promise of entering his rest still stands, let us fear lest any of you should seem to have failed to reach it.
Just stop there. What's the surprise? Since the promise of entering God's rest still stands, I would expect, make sure that none of you fails to enter it. But where's the focus? Let us be fearful or apprehensive lest any of you should seem to fail to enter it. The focus is not on me failing to enter it, but making sure that there is nobody in the congregation who's missing out on it. Huh? Rather surprised. Can you see the focus? Is not individual but communal. Keep going.
For good news came to us just as to them, but the message they heard did not benefit them, because they were not united by faith with those who listened.
What was the message that came to them? Was the promise, God's promise to give them the land. Go on.
For we who have believed enter that rest, as he has said, as I swore in my wrath, they shall not enter my rest. Although his works were finished from the foundation of the world. For he has somewhere spoken of the seventh day in this way.
That's Genesis 2.
And God rested on the seventh day from all his works. And again in this passage he said, they shall not enter my rest. Therefore, since therefore it remains for some to enter it, and those who formerly received the good news failed to enter because of disobedience, again he appoints a certain day, today, saying through David so long afterward, in the words already quoted, today if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts. For if Joshua had given them rest, God would not have spoken of another day later on. So then, there remains a Sabbath rest for the people of God. For whoever has entered God's rest has also rested from his works, as God did from his.
Notice the perfect tense, has entered, means it's already accomplished, but it's still going on. Keep going.
Let us therefore strive to enter that rest, so that no one may fall by the same sort of disobedience. For the word of God is living and active, sharper than any two-edged sword, piercing to the division of soul and of spirit, of joints and of marrow, and discerning the thoughts and intentions of the heart. And no creature is hidden from his sight, but all are naked and exposed to the eyes of him to whom we must give account.
Now there's an odd jump in that argument. Did you pick it?
In verse 12.
Yes. What's the jump in verse 12? Up to there he's been talking about what? Rest. And if you take into account the mention of rest in the previous chapter, you get the term katapausis is used, guess how many times? 7 times. 7? Sabbath, 7. So 7 times talking about rest. So you're talking about rest, and then all of a sudden you get a switcheroo, and he talks about what?
The word.
Activity of God and the word of God. Now that's kind of, there's a riddle here, because there seems to be something of a contradiction, or at the most you can say, this has nothing to do with that. And we need to take an account of that, but you probably know what the connection is. What's the connection? Sorry, what?
You have to hear.
You have to hear in order to enter that rest. Not just to enter that rest, but to receive that rest as what? Not as a demand, law, bad news, but as grace, good news, gift. It's through the speaking of God, the voice of God, that he delivers his rest to his people through his word. If you go to the handout, I'll just go through what I have there, and then if there's some issues with it, please don't be scared to bring it up. I've covered A and B of the handout. Go to C. God chose to make the temple a place of rest, menucha, katapausis, for his ark and himself with his people. So the tabernacle was the place of rest for the ark, and then when they came into the land, the tabernacle was at Shiloh and various other places, and eventually the ark came into the temple. So the temple is God's place of rest with his people. And I've given you some other references there. It's also the place of rest for God's people with him. The temple, just think of it, is God's place of rest and the people's place of rest with God. He also gave them the land and the temple in the land as their place of rest with him. Now here in Psalm 95, the Levitical choir, the praise singers, the psalm singers, who are appointed by David and represent David, called on the whole congregation, all the people, to join with them in praising the Lord at the temple, probably on a Sabbath day, whether it's a festive Sabbath or some other Sabbath. But notice it's Sabbath, time of rest. And they urged the people, above everything else, to listen to the voice of God. Now, that's a bit funny, because you would think the people would believe that they were coming to the temple to do what?
Serve God.
To serve God how?
By doing something.
Doing what?
Resting and praising.
Well, that's the right, that's what's this. But go back to Exodus and Leviticus. People come to the temple to do what? To sacrifice. To bring animals, and to bring bread, to bring olive oil, wine, incense, and to offer it to God. It looks as if they are providing food for God. This is basic food stuff. What was the basic diet of Israel? Bread, olive oil, meat only on special occasions, but this is so it's a special meal, and olive oil, and then wine was used every day. Water wasn't good; it helped to disinfect the water and to keep it safe. So, what's the basic menu of every Israelite person who was bread, olive oil, and wine? And then for special occasions, you top it up by meat. And that's what made the temple visits very special, because if you think in ordinary terms, you don't eat meat the way we do every day. The only time you eat meat is on special occasions, and the most special occasions is the time when you go to the temple. So the people come there to bring things to God, to bring offerings to God. And for themselves, what they're looking forward to is eating and drinking, have feasting in God's presence. A barbecue, you can imagine how nice that would smell if you hadn't eaten meat for 3 months. The smell of barbecuing meat. And not just a little portion. There's a huge amount, more than you can possibly stuff yourself full with in the time available. Okay. So they're coming there and they are thinking, okay, we're going to have a good feast sometime today or whenever. And they're arrested and said the most important thing is not eating and drinking in God's presence. The most important thing is not to provide food for God, but to hear. And so the choir, David, the Holy Spirit through David and the choir, warns the people that those who don't listen to the voice of God won't enter the place of rest. They will enter the temple, but they won't enter into God's place of rest, God's time of rest. Now, exactly what's involved is not said. Is it here in the temple? Is it heaven? Is it this day? It's open-ended. Now, God fulfilled that promise to provide a place of rest for his people in their heavenly homeland through Jesus. So Jesus is the new Joshua. Implied in this is typology. Joshua was not able to lead his people, bring the people into the place of rest. But now Jesus, the new Joshua, has brought the people of God into a heavenly, earthly place of rest. The generation of Israelites in the desert didn't enter God's heavenly place of rest because they didn't believe in the gospel. Notice this is not law preaching, this is gospel preaching. They missed out not because they disobeyed the law, but they disbelieved the promise of God, the good news of God. Now say, the disobedience here is not so much disobedience to the law, but disobedience to the gospel. Not listening to the gospel. And because they don't listen to the gospel, they don't enter the place of rest, and the ultimate consequence of that is that they die in the desert. They die. That's the consequence of refusing to listen to the gospel. Then Hebrews says, we who believe the gospel and hear the gospel now enter that heavenly place of rest. But we enter it as visitors, people who come to the temple, come to church, but at yet the same time, we still continue to strive to enter it and to stay there forever. So we've reached the place of rest. We are there, but we are not yet ready to settle there and stay there forever. So it's a matter of doing this not just once, but doing this again and again and again until finally we settle down with God in his heavenly place and time of rest. Do you get the basic dimensions here? What's involved? Now, for what reason do we enter that heavenly place of rest? Heaven is the place where, for the eternal Sabbatismos, the Sabbath celebration for all the people of God. Now, Sabbatismos seems to be an invention, a term that was invented by Hebrews. Before Hebrews, there are no recorded occurrences of this verb, this noun. Sabbatismos comes from a verb that's used in the Septuagint to translate the term for resting on the Sabbath day, for Sabbathing. Sabbatizine. Sabbatizine is not your normal resting on the Sabbath, but the resting on the Sabbath that you do at a festival. Now, what's unique about the festival? That's the time when you eat and drink and have merry. You participate in the full divine service at the temple. So Sabbatizine is to have that festive celebration. What are we anticipating is the eternal Sabbath celebration. And what does that consist of?
Of God,
it's in the presence of God. It means not working. Okay, not work. That's negative. It's positive. Not working in the presence of God, and yet doing something, praising and thanking God, singing songs of praise. But what's implied, what's not stated here, and you should have got it if you've been listening to me. What was so special about that going to the temple on festive occasions? It wasn't just the whiz-bang choir with all the singing, the way the seminary students are so fortunate to have every day to join in the heavenly praises here on earth. So heavenly praises, singing, rejoicing, joyful occasion, meeting with people, but yeah, okay, you got it, go on. Eating. Feasting in God's presence as God's guests at God's table. So the eternal Sabbath celebration. In the Jewish tradition, the Sabbath day is, I had the impression that the Sabbath day was a gloomy day. Okay, once the sun went down, okay, then you stopped work and you sat there gloomily, examining yourself. What?
Like a good reformed man?
Like a good reformed man, making sure that you don't have any fun, and you tell the kids to be quiet and to stop playing. It's a solemn occasion, earnest occasion, and you spend all day feeling gloomy. Okay, that was my impression. Talk to any Jew and they'll say, what's the character of a Sabbath day? A joyful day, a happy day, a light-hearted day, a time that you enjoy each other. And most particularly is a day for feasting. It's a day for feasting. Now, it's true and it's good feasting because yeah, you're a woman. What's the problem if you have a really complicated meal, a slap-up meal, for you, not for the people you're making the meal?
What's the problem in making it?
What's the sad thing about?
You're busting your tail to get it ready.
You're not only busting your tail to get it ready, but when all the people, your guests, are eating and drinking and having a good time, what do you have to do?
Serve.
You've got to serve. You've got to heat it up, you've got to make sure it's ready. Now, in the Jewish tradition, and then cleaning up afterwards, you've got to do the dishes. You know, the kids never volunteer to do the dishes, the guests never, your husband never volunteers to do the dishes. He's there taking care of the guests, but really, he's just enjoying the guests, and you're the one that misses out. Now, the laws of the Sabbath are such that the mother of the house, the woman, doesn't have to lift her finger. Why? Well, no, just think of not priests. This I'm talking about Sabbath for Jews, the present day. The home is the focus of the Sabbath. There's no temple. It's prepared beforehand. It's all prepared beforehand, and it's ready for service. And all you need to do is to get it out of the cupboard and put it on the table. And you don't have to clean up then. You're not allowed to clean up because you can't do any work. The dishes have to be done Saturday night once the Sabbath ends. It's a day for celebration, feasting, a happy time. Now, that's in the Jewish tradition. So we are looking forward to a Sabbath celebration, the eternal Sabbath celebration in heaven, where we will enjoy God's company, enjoy the company of others, have fun, talk, engage with each other, sing, make music, all that kind of stuff. But best of all, it's a time for feasting. It's a time for feasting. Best food, best wine, Barossa Valley Shirazes, which are foretaste of heaven. Okay, heaven is the place for the Sabbatismos, the Sabbath celebration, the enjoyment of the Sabbath. Yes?
Where I'm having a hard time, does that noun show up in chapter 4 someplace? Or
yes, it's verse 9. Verse 9? Sabbatismos. There remains a Sabbath rest for the people of God. Can you see that translation doesn't do justice? Even if you take a Sabbath celebration, I remember reading it first of all and had this very gloomy picture of what would be going on. Doing nothing, just sitting still all day. Particularly as a child, that would be a foretaste of hell for me rather than a foretaste of heaven. And particularly if you couldn't have any fun. Now, let me just finish this and I'll get your picture. Through faith in the gospel, we cease from our labours, says Hebrews. We rest from our labours, just as God rested from his. Now, what labours do we rest from? Now, in the Old Covenant, it was the labour of work. So 7 days a week you work, and on the seventh day, even women and servants didn't have to do any work. Now, you don't know, but you know that a woman's work is never done. And sometimes, Christmas and Easter, those kind of occasions, are the most stressful occasions because there's so much onus on you to make sure that everybody's having a good time. It's hard work. And then the danger is that people won't appreciate it and you feel very upset because you've put all this effort into it, you're exhausted, and people maybe appreciate it, but they ignore you. Now, that's the lot of many women. Okay, but this is where even everybody rests and everybody enjoys the time together. In fact, according to Jewish customs about the Sabbath, there's a Sabbath Seder, which is the main meal, the Sabbath meal. You can either have it Friday night or midday Saturday. We get reference to Jesus going to these Sabbath Seders, these Sabbath meals, either the night or the morning. Do you know who the head of the house is on those occasions? The mother. The mother. Okay, she is the focus of it. Okay, this is her domain. So the focus is on the mother of the house, the head of the house, not the male figure, but the female figure. It's on the mother, and it's her day. It's where she has her family, her extended family around her, and where she enjoys the love and affection and appreciation of the whole family. It's the kind of thing that we have, as Christians, we should have, for Sunday meals, and that used to be, but people are so busy these days you can't have a good Sunday meal, and even for Easter and Christmas. Because we eat top-notch food all year round, there's nothing special about these occasions, okay? But we need to see the world that this is spoken into and the background to this. The Sabbath celebration. Now, we rest from our labours. That's how I got onto this. And it means that everybody doesn't have to do anything. Now, the labours that we rest from aren't the labours that we do to make a living, but what labours do we rest from? By entering the Sabbath rest of God, listening to the voice of God? The strain of justifying ourselves, promoting ourselves, making do, looking after ourselves, providing for ourselves. All that work, in Lutheran terms, the work of self-justification, the work of self-promotion, the work of self-provision. Not just looking after yourself, but looking after your husband, looking after your children, and having to provide for them as the end of life. We rest from our labours. We stop working so that God can do his work in us. And the greatest work is that we don't have to do anything to get God's grace and favour, to justify ourselves. It's given to us as a gift for us to receive, us to celebrate, to take into our hands and enjoy. So we can rely on what Christ has accomplished for us and receive the benefits of his work on our behalf. And lastly, instead of just visiting this place of rest occasionally, and look at it quite concretely, how often do we enter this place of rest in its fullest sense? Once a week on Sunday, okay? But we don't stay in church. At least we don't in Australia. We don't stay in church, we go back home, and we need to come again to the same place next week, the week after. So we keep entering the time and place of rest, but we don't yet stay there. When will we no longer have to make that repeated journey, that repeated pilgrimage? In heaven. We can settle down then and retire. Yeah, that's a bit weak, but we can enjoy leisure with God. We can rest from our earthly labours to enjoy the fruit of God's labour for us. Now, somebody had a hand up just very quickly before. Yes?
Could you say that this rest is a removal of the curse of the fall?
Of course.
There's the work, there's the household, the bearing, Jesus in the kingdom. Those things are not going to be, you will not be being married or having children or this sort of thing. You won't be working fields, raising food, so that the curse is removed. That's the rest. That's the rest.
The curse is, negatively, the curse is gone. There's only blessing. There's no longer strain, anxiety. It's a time for joy. And that's another way of putting it. It's the time for joy. Gladness, celebration. Anything else? Yes.
I know this is more Gospels than Hebrews, but what was it really the Pharisees who did turn the Sabbath, which was supposed to be a rest, into a burden on the people by adding their laws to God's law and hedging God's law, so to speak, with all of their extra provisions on the Sabbath?
Yeah, that's partly true, but it's not universally true. Look, we Christians give the Pharisees a bad rap, instead of realizing that of all the groups in the New Testament that were closest to Jesus, those who were closest to Jesus were the Pharisees. And I can't go into Pharisee theology. You need to read some of the modern work that's been done on the Pharisees to appreciate what they were doing. You can do it negatively, and there's no doubt you can turn it into a burden. But the great stress, at least if you look at what's in the Mishnah, the Talmud, and the Jewish heritage, is of the gift of the Sabbath and the joy of the Sabbath. And the laws there are, if you like, to prevent the Sabbath from being desecrated, to make sure that it is a day of joy. Now, positively speaking, those laws are to make sure that people don't wriggle out of this, and particularly they don't burden women and children. Okay? And so you get all sorts of definitions about what you can or can't do. Now, you can give that a negative spin, but its purpose is positive. What's its positive purpose? To receive the gift of rest. To protect the joy of the Sabbath, to stop the Sabbath from being desecrated, so it remains a holy day, so that you doesn't become a common day. Yeah, there's abuse there, and Jesus does attack the laws around the Sabbath, but the intention is not for him to have a go at this, but there's deeper issues always at stake. The Sabbath controversies are the presenting issue, but there's deeper things at stake behind them. And if you're interested in it, just go to one of the good commentaries and the modern ones, and they will unpack that for you. Yes?
Is there existing a sense that keeping the Sabbath day will usher in the Messianic kingdom among some Jewish people?
Yes, that's very strong. But you can see it's tipped over. There's two traditions in Judaism. One is we keep the Sabbath day in order to usher in and hasten the coming of the Messiah. Okay, that's one way of looking at it. But the reverse of that is we keep the Sabbath day because on the Sabbath day we anticipate and receive the Sabbath rest, the joy of the Messiah. Right, can you see there's two ways of looking at it, and the positive can very easily tip over to the negative formulation. Most of those negatives come into existence once the temple is destroyed. Once the temple is destroyed, this no longer works, because you no longer have the house of God, the place of rest, the means of rest, God speaking to his people. Once the temple goes, the law goes, the gospel goes, and all that you've got left is the law. But if you want to understand the Mishnah and Judaism, you need to see that the Mishnah is the equivalent for the Jews, present-day Jews, of our New Testament, and it reinterprets all that ritual material from the Old Testament in the light of the fact that there is no longer any temple priesthood sacrifices. And that doesn't mean that's the end of the story, but they reinterpret it and focus attention then on the family altar rather than the temple altar. So the family, the house, and family meals become the centre of Jewish religious life. And that remains to the present day. That's if you want to exercise a hermeneutic of appreciation instead of a critical hermeneutic. Let's do some feasting.